This is VOA Africa.
Good evening, I'm Esther Gidhu. It's Wednesday, October 30th. This is Africa 54. Will Sudan's railway, once the largest in Africa, get back on track? A U.S. Africa Command official discusses threats on the continent. And meet the woman who founded a blooming female drone community. Those stories and more coming up. But first, Sudan's transitional government is working to restore stability in the country and improve infrastructure after years of repression under long-time ruler Omar al-Bashir. The country once had the largest railway networks in Africa and brought train cars from the United States. Now the railway supporters hope the U.S. will soon lift sanctions to help restore it to its former glory. Naba Muhyiddin reports from Khartoum.
65-year-old Mahdi Yassin has been working for the Sudan Railways Corporation since he graduated in 1972. The British built Sudan's railway over a century ago. Yassin remembers the railway's glory days when it was the largest in Africa, running 5,000 kilometers from the Egyptian Red Sea and crisscrossing Sudan to what is now South Sudan.
The Bait School was graduating 100 students per year, all qualified to work on the railway. It was a strong corporation. There was an abundance in spare parts and locomotives.
But the railway fell apart through mismanagement and a fear of organized labor's influence on the economy and politics. Sudan fired thousands of qualified rail workers, replacing some with political appointees, most of them after former President Omar al-Bashir came to power. Railway workers hope Bashir's ouster in April will encourage the U.S. to lift sanctions on Sudan, put in place for harboring terrorists and rights abuses.
إذا كان حصل lifting للعقوبات.
If the sanctions are lifted, we can at least be updated with the technology of the trains. We're so late to update the current technology, we're functioning with the past century's technology. We need to update and then develop.
In modern times, the state-run railway became reliant on U.S. trains and parts. But under decades of U.S. sanctions, Khartoum was unable to buy U.S. parts, leaving only 18 of the railway's 106 U.S.-made trains in service.
When the U.S. embargo cut out everything, we had to import our spare parts and needs from other countries. We resorted to China. We have the American locomotives, and of course, China cannot produce the American spare parts, especially the main machines from Caterpillar. So what are we going to do?
Importing a few Chinese trains in 2014 allowed Sudan to launch 2 new passenger lines, but poor track conditions means the trains can only go 60 kilometers per hour, half their maximum speed. Before railway worker Yassin retires at the end of this year, he hopes to see U.S. sanctions lifted and more efforts by Sudan's transitional government to get the country's lost glory back on track. Naba Muhyiddin for VOA News, Khartoum.
Renewed anti-gay focus in Uganda has led a long-castigated and already fearful community to lie low. Police arrested 16 activists last week on suspicion of homosexuality, which is illegal in Uganda. Some in the LGBT community are forced into hiding. Halima Thumani reports from Kampala.
21-year-old Shamim Priti, not her real name, has taken shelter in this Kampala's safe space for the past 3 years. She says her mother kicked her out of her home when Shamim was 16 and called the police because she is transgender.
When they took me to the police, my mother was there waiting for me. They really mistreated me. There was an officer who was very homophobic. He got a hold of me and beat me up. He called in the media, and in front of the press, they took my clothes off.
LGBT support group Icebreakers Uganda set up the Safe House in 2012, just 1 year before lawmakers voted to increase the punishment for homosexuality from life in prison to death. Under Western pressure, Uganda in 2014 overturned the Anti-Homosexuality Act, but gay sex remains illegal, and members of the LGBT community are routinely harassed and shunned in a country where many revile homosexuality.
Evicting you, you don't have anywhere to go, you don't have money for rent, you don't have what? So we offer space here, usually for 1 month, so that you go back on your feet as you look for money to go and rent somewhere else.
Earlier this month, Uganda's ethics minister announced the bill would be reintroduced, raising fears of renewed attacks on the gay community.
Already, most people do not have homes, they do not have education, they are not employed, they are homeless. So when something like this comes, it threatens even the little safety that they had.
A Ugandan government spokesman denied any plan to reintroduce what some call the Kill the Gays bill. Even so, the LGBT community sees an ominous sign in the arrest of 16 gay activists last week who simply possessed condoms and anti-HIV medicines.
You're out and then you're thinking, yeah, I'm letting loose. Before you know it, you'll want to dance in a certain kind of way. And then, boom, you're thinking, oh wait, you have to control yourself. You do not know who's watching or who will get offended by the way you're really having a good time or whatever. So you have to be on the cautious side all the time.
For now, Uganda's LGBT support groups are offering training on what to do in case of arrest and providing a place to hide from persecution. Halima Athmani for VOA News, Kampala.
6 French and Ugandan campaign groups are asking a French court to order energy major Total to disclose how it's addressing human and environmental impact of a Ugandan oil field. Among them is Africa Institute for Energy Governance, a Ugandan independent policy research and advocacy group. The non-governmental organization, which specializes in public energy policy and environmental governance, is also engaging the civil society in energy and conservation issues. Last week, Total said it had no immediate comment on the group's legal application, but it said it was working in Uganda in compliance with the national and international standards. Now, for more on the story, I'm joined in the studio by Diana Nabiruma, Senior Program and Communications Officer with the Institute. Diana, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you, Esther.
Now, bring us up to speed on what the key issues are regarding this story that prompted your group and others to seek legal intervention.
Okay, so Total is operating in a national park in Uganda. They are in River Nile, and they're going to abstract water from Lake Albert. And while this is the case, there are grave environmental and social concerns with that. And while this is the case, no mitigation plans to mitigate the impacts Total's activities will have are in place. So that is major for us.
Okay, so when you look at what has been going on, what has been the impact on the communities that live around this oil field?
Communities' land has been taken, and communities have been unable to replace the land that they lost in totality. What that means is that their incomes reduce, they're unable to educate their children, they're unable to access health services.
So before you and the other groups went to seek the French court intervention, did you seek any direct talks with Total's, officials?
Yes, in November 2018, we interfaced with Total and Uganda's National Environment Management Agency at a public hearing, and we raised our concerns and said that mitigation plans must be in place before Total can go on with its activities. But our concerns were not acted on.
So has the court in France, said anything since you applied to have this kind of hearing and intervention?
No, we haven't yet, but we applied to have a first hearing because we don't want the environmental concerns to go unmitigated, because Total is still doing its work while we have concerns.
So, one of the issues somebody is, thinking about is whether there are other environmental issues. Are there other health concerns, too, regarding the communities that live around there?
Certainly, as our audience members know, oil activities cause a lot of health concerns, cancers, asthma, respiratory diseases, and even in their own reports, the oil companies realize and they say that oil activities will increase HIV and AIDS and other diseases that are a burden on the healthcare system in Uganda.
What are you expecting from the French court?
We are expecting that Total will be compelled to put in place mitigation plans and will monitor Total to ensure that these mitigation plans are implemented.
So if this doesn't happen soon, what is the next step in terms of your group and the other advocacy groups?
We continue to sensitize and mobilize communities to put pressure on our government to ensure that these mitigation plans are put in place and that they are implemented.
Well, Diana, it looks like, you know, is a story that, you know, kind of bit more than it triggers a lot of issues when you say about cancers, and we don't even know, do we know about any figures? Do we know if there are some health officials that are also concerned about what's going on among the communities that live there?
So we are speaking from experience. In Uganda, we haven't documented health impacts yet, but we know that where oil is produced in other countries, such as Nigeria, even in the US, we see that health concerns are major. Communities report increased incidences of cancer, they report increased incidences of asthma, they report increased incidences of headaches. So we are watching for these health concerns, and we want to undertake some actions such as studies to collect baseline data of the health of our communities so that we can monitor what the health impacts are.
So very briefly, I'm curious, why did you have to seek, you know, legal intervention from a French court? Why couldn't you go to Uganda's court?
First of all, we have cases in both the Ugandan and French courts, but because French courts, we assume, are more independent than the Ugandan courts, government, the executive has a stronghold on the Ugandan courts. We wanted to go to a court that is independent.
Diana, thank you very much for talking to us on Africa 54.
Thank you.
Diana Nabiruma is a Senior Program and Communications Officer with Africa Institute for Energy Governance. Here in the United States, the House impeachment inquiry is scheduled to hear from two State Department Ukraine experts on Wednesday. This comes a day after U.S. Army officer on the White House National Security Staff said he was so concerned that U.S. President Donald Trump urged Ukraine to investigate political opponents that he alerted his superiors. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman told the House committees Tuesday that he was among those who listened in on Trump's July 25th phone call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. In his prepared remarks, Vindman said he did not think it was proper to demand that a foreign government investigate a U.S. citizen. The Trump-Zelensky call is at the center of efforts by U.S. House Democrats to impeach Trump for asking Kiev to investigate alleged corruption by former U.S. Vice President and 2020 Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden and his son Hunter, who worked for a Ukrainian gas company. No evidence to support either charge has surfaced. The Democrats want to know if Trump held up to $400 million in badly needed military aid to Ukraine unless Zelensky publicly agreed to investigations. Trump has called the impeachment probe illegitimate because the entire House never voted to conduct one, even though no law requires a vote. The White House and Republicans have complained that the proceedings are being held behind closed doors, which is a routine practice for any grand jury-style investigation. In order to satisfy those concerns, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has scheduled a vote on a resolution Thursday spelling out the rules for the inquiry. It would clearly give the Republican minority equal opportunity to question witnesses, ask for written testimony, and subpoena witnesses and records, reaching out to a foreign government to meddle in a U.S. election, and a so-called quid pro quo are possible impeachable offenses. You're watching Africa 54, and we'll be right back.
am Sheikh Asali, host and senior editor of VOA's international call-in talk show, Straight Talk Africa.
Today we'll examine the tobacco industry.
We pretty much touch on anything that you can think of. Politics, health issues, human rights issues, you name it, we talk about it. The issues that we discuss are pertinent to most people on the African continent. A very, very rare and unique opportunity to interact with their leaders.
The lyrics could be French,
English,
Portuguese,
Bantu,
Arabic.
It is the beat.
The African beat that counts.
The beat does all the translations.
It cuts across all languages and gives us the understanding that this is the African beat.
It is so distinct
and adhesive.
It binds us together.
African beat on the Voice of America. For more information, visit our website at www.voanews.com/AfricanBeat.
I'm Clara Frank, and here's what's trending. In crime-ridden South Africa, a new app is giving hope to victims. Namola offers a free 24-hour emergency assistance service. Users simply press a button on their smart devices to alert the app's operators, who then dispatch the emergency help needed. The app is linked to private security personnel, ambulance services, fire departments, and the police. Namola has over 350,000 users to date. In addition to the app, a physical panic button is also available at a monthly fee of around $5. Next up, a group of Hong Kong students have developed a virtual reality game they hope will allow more people to experience the turbulent anti-government demonstrations from the view of a frontline protester. The first-person game allows players to dodge tear gas canisters. Duck behind ramshackle burning barriers, and run from riot police. VR headsets can be used to experience the game through a 360-degree perspective. The students say they have submitted their game to Steam, an online video game distributor developed by American gaming firm Valve. They hope to have it available to the public next month. Valve did not respond to a request for comment. And finally, Japan is known for its packed trains and busy stations, especially during rush hour. With the 2020 Olympics fast approaching, Tokyo's metro service is partnering with Japan's Therapy Association to teach the public better escalator etiquette. They're staging escalator safety workshops, where participants are taught the best way to behave on escalators. After sitting through a short class, they then practice what they learn by riding an escalator and experience what happens when an escalator suddenly stops. And that's what's trending today.
The U.S. military says there are now fewer than 150 Islamic State fighters left in Libya. That's a huge reduction from earlier this year, when AFRICOM officials said Islamic State had as many as 750 members in Libya. In a VOA exclusive, U.S. Africa Command Director of Public Affairs, Colonel Chris Carnes, spoke with Pentagon correspondent Carla Bob.
We've continued to watch and monitor the situation in Libya. Our concern was that with the civil war, these terrorist groups, in particular ISIS, would look to leverage this opportunity to grow, to recruit, to train, and create additional chaos in a situation that is already chaotic. So when the opportunity presented itself, and this was through careful observation, there were instances where we saw a regeneration of the ISIS capability. So they were gathering in camps where they were doing some of the basic training and starting to do some of the recruiting. So we wanted to make sure that that threat did not grow, and consequently airstrikes were conducted. When you look at the numbers, it's under 150. So 43 Islamic State fighters have been taken out of Libya permanently. and we will look to continue to monitor the situation.
When you say under 150, do you mean under 150 ISIS fighters, you think?
That's correct.
That is the assessment now of the U.S. military. There are less than 200 Islamic State fighters in the state of Libya.
In Libya, that's correct.
With the Middle East defeat, territorial defeat of ISIS, there was a major fear that Islamic State would spread to Africa. You're saying that it really hasn't spread too far. It's been contained in Libya.
So what we've seen, it's a trickle. So the ISIS threat still exists. They're in pockets across Africa.
One of those pockets is in Somalia, where the U.S. has carried out more than 40 strikes against Islamic State and the al-Qaeda affiliate al-Shabaab this year. The U.S. military says the latest strike on Friday killed 3 Islamic State fighters.
That's where the U.S. has a pretty large presence. Would the U.S. military say that they're being successful in Somalia at this point?
Our primary role is to develop the Danab, which is their elite fighting force, and to make sure the Somali National Army is also in a position where they continue to make success. But oftentimes people will see the airstrikes, which are important because they help disrupt al-Shabaab, they create organizational confusion, they set the conditions for governance, and they're foundational to the progress that's being made. But the progress is being made by the federal government of Somalia and the Danab. And, you know, at one time, when you looked at Somalia, it was about 85 to 90% of the country was almost overrun with al-Shabaab. Today, they maintain about 20% of territory.
Tune in tomorrow for more of Kalabab's exclusive interview with the AFRICOM spokesperson, Colonel Kans, as he discusses the new U.S. airbase in Agadez, Niger, competition from China and Russia, and when we'll see the AFRICOM commander back on the continent. It may be sooner than you think. Now, U.S. President Donald Trump has made protecting Syria's oil reserves a top priority and is deploying U.S. troops to the oil fields. Senior administration officials say the U.S. wants to keep the oil fields from falling back into the hands of Islamic State militants. Experts, however, question Trump's focus on the oil fields. VOA's diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain has our report.
These images of angry Kurds reacting to being abandoned by U.S. forces in Syria underscored the widespread criticism of President Donald Trump's decision to withdraw American soldiers in the face of a Turkish incursion. But now the president wants American troops deployed to protect the oil fields in eastern Syria.
The oil is, so valuable for many reasons. It fueled ISIS, number one. Number two, it helps the Kurds because it's basically been taken away from the Kurds. They were able to live with that oil. And number three, it can help us because we should be able to take some also. And what I intend to do, perhaps, is make a deal with an ExxonMobil or one of our great companies to go in there and do it properly.
Defense Secretary Esper further explained the reasoning.
We are now taking some actions, I'm not going to get into the details, to strengthen our position at Dar es-Zar to ensure that we can deny ISIS access to the oil fields because we want to make sure that they don't have access to the resources that may allow them to strike within the region, to strike Europe, to strike the United States.
Islamic State militants depended on the oil a few years ago, say experts.
When ISIS was controlling a lot of territory in Syria and Iraq, it used the oil fields to its benefit, both to fuel its military operations, literally, put oil in its trucks, in its cars, in its vehicles, etc., but also smuggled enormous quantities of oil onto the black market.
But most experts dismiss the idea that American companies could make use of Syria's oil.
American oil companies would face a host of practical difficulties in operating there, legal difficulties, practical challenges. So this would not be easy to do, and I'm not sure they would be actually eager to do it.
Jeff Colgan told VOA that terrorists, going back at least to Osama bin Laden, have often falsely claimed that America is only involved in the Middle East so it can take the oil away from countries in the region.
This kind of comment and suggestion from President Trump feeds that narrative, and it really works against the safety, the long-term safety of United States citizens to have that kind of narrative legitimated in the Middle East.
President Trump, Laurie Blank says, is fixated on the oil because of an outdated concept of war.
That interest seems to, at least in my mind, be based on a very ancient conception of war that doesn't exist anymore, which is the idea of conquest. That you go, you conquer, you take. And the world doesn't work that way anymore.
With so many actors involved in the Syrian conflict, Russians, Kurds, Syrian troops, and even Iranian fighters, experts say control of the oil fields is likely to be contested. Cindy Sain, VOA News, the State Department.
It's time for our tech segment, and joining us now is Paul Ndiho. Paul, what do you have for us?
Hello, Esther. After falling in love with a flying hat drone, a young videographer searched for a community of other female drone pilots, but couldn't find one, so she started her own. Dina Mitchell has our report.
I've always imagined visiting the Great Wall of China. When I discovered I could document my journey with a whole new perspective, I fell in love with an eye in the sky.
When newly minted drone pilot Elena Buenrostro came back from her first major drone trip to China, she sought out other female flyers. What she found was a community dominated by men. So she started one herself.
Less than 6% of certified drone pilots in the U.S. are women. So I created Women Who Drone in October of 2017, just out of the need to create a community and to connect women from around the world who were flying drones.
Word spread quickly, and she says now more than 30,000 women are sharing content footage on a daily basis. But she didn't stop there.
Why don't we start teaching women how to fly drones and how to get started? And that's when we started our lessons.
Members hold meetups around the world, take lessons, and offer online support to help pilots prepare for government certification, which is required for commercial work in the United States. And there is work for drone pilots.
Anywhere from cinematography, photography, to agricultural and data collection jobs, documenting marathons, skiing, snowboarding. There's just so many different things you can use drones to detect.
Buenrostro says a reason that more women aren't flying is that the advertising often portrays drones as very masculine.
Women aren't getting access to drones from an early age, and they're not being inspired, and there's not enough stories to encourage them to enter this field.
That is something she hopes to change, and why she's now bringing her passion for drone flying to young kids.
We'll show them how to use drones within the classroom, very tiny drones, and then we take them outside and we fly bigger drones.
Changing the world, one drone at a time. Dina Mitchell for VOA News, San Francisco, California.
Thank you, Paul. And that's our show for today. Good night from Washington.